welcome to day 5 of Anantha, the festival that is being organized by Samyukta Poetry. And today we are extremely honored to have with us two livewire individuals whose work, as well as whose ethos have come to define themselves for me. So first, as is the wont, I will give an official introduction to them, though they are extremely well-known names. Gautier is a French novelist from Pondicherry, French novelist and poet from Pondicherry. And, he's based in Oslo. He writes historical fiction about Pondicherry's place in the world. And he works at an institution that promotes art and culture from the global south. And he is the author of novels such as The Secret of Lakshmi, the Kane Secret de Lakshmi, very bad French, I'm sorry, and Latine, which has been translated into English as Latine. And he also has a collection of short stories, Nocturne Pondicherry.
Nocturne Pondicherry.
My apologies.
No,
and we also have Dr. Ananya Jahanara Kabir, Professor of English at the Department of English in King's College London, and the winner of India's Infosys Prize for the Humanities in 2018, the Humboldt Research Prize from Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, Germany 2019, and who's currently working on creolization as historical process and cultural theory. And she's also got a new book out. I'm hoping she will tell us more about it. And now that takes care of the official introduction, but unofficially, and more importantly, I came across both these individuals through their portal on Facebook, Le Tine Creole. Okay, and there they have been talking about the most interesting mixed masala kind of matters. They've been talking about those very essential intersections that often are elided or ignored in the general scheme of things, or in the process of whitewashing people's individual histories. So what they have done is they have ensured that these origins are not forgotten. These intersections remain very, very alive, active, and through which traffic has to constantly pass. Between them, they have ensured that this entire world of oceanic modernities, oceanic histories are not lost to the waters of time, I must say. So they've talked about, people who have crossed over. Ari has those wonderful experiences that he narrates, the people he has met, his own stories. And, Professor Kabir has written in huge volumes in terms of the processes of creolization, the way that dance has become such an important metaphor for decoding cultural histories. And as I was talking about those intersections through Latine Creole, they have discussed very necessary facets of intersectionalities, such as music, food, particularly the cuisine, sessions I couldn't sit through without feeling extremely hungry and upset, because there was nothing of that sort in my kitchen. And language, very importantly, language and literature. And they have brought in very eminent and very committed individuals who are very important names in these areas, who have done real work and who are working towards establishing a very, very significant corpus of work, which ensures that none of these processes are forgotten, none of these people are forgotten, none of these histories are forgotten. So in that sense of the term, I have great respect for them, and particularly with regard to their work ethos, where they give credit where credit is due. They have a very, very dedicated, group of people who follow their work. That includes me as well, and the way that they nurture that community and then also extend that goodwill to the general community as such, by cross-referencing people, helping people meet people. That's a great thing to do. And Professor Kabir, between you and me, I really, really admire your stance on academic integrity, being an academic myself. So thank you very much for that. And so now I cannot take any more of their precious time, because I want the audience to see this marvelous energy that is there between these two individuals in terms of the conversation that they're going to have on a very important, culturally, politically, socially, I would say economically relevant area. And I'm going to leave it to them to talk about it. It is also signifies Ari's new work. So, over to you, both of you.
Thank you, Sonia. Thanks a lot. We're so happy to be here.
Let me unmute myself. Yes, thank you very much, Sonia, for that wonderful, warm, and what can I say, camaraderie-filled introduction. We are in this together. We met virtually during the time of the pandemic at the same time that Ari and I, created our platform for connection at difficult times. But it soon became a way, as you have correctly summarized, to remind people of other connections, other intersections, to use your very fertile word. We use the idea of creolization to sum up all these intersections and encounters, and the histories of which are, I wouldn't say even they are forgotten, but they're almost, to use a word that you also use, elided, erased, often deliberately by constituencies, by cultural viewpoints and political viewpoints that would rather we didn't remember intersections, didn't remember reaching out, connections, negotiations, and eventually creating new cultural forms, which often cock a snook, to ideas of purity, hierarchy, hegemony, and so on. This is our work on the Thin Eye Creole. We are grateful that people like it, because without the people, what are we doing? Just the two of us on a platform wouldn't make any sense. So I know that Ari joins me in thanking you and everybody who has made our work meaningful to us. So what we decided we'll do today is, I will hand over to the poet and novelist in a second. We are going to talk about Ari's poetry, which he will tell us, obviously, where it comes from and where he began writing poetry. It is true that when we first got to know him, we have got to know him as a novelist, but suddenly he sprung forth these amazing poems. And we want to talk about those today with you and your audience, because after all, this is a poetry festival. So Ari, maybe we can start by just going over the conditions or the sudden. It seems to me that while we were working together on the Thin Eye Creole from 2020 May onwards, and it's the third year that we are doing this work together now, it being 2022. So when we started our platform, almost at the first few public sessions we had with colleagues and friends who invited us to speak about things together, suddenly there was poetry. Do you want to talk a little bit about how the pandemic, poetry, and even the Thin Eye Creole platform suddenly came together for you?
Le corps noir n'est pas un hôtel pour vos génuflexions. Le corps noir n'est pas un cimetière pour enterrer votre haine et votre xénophobie. Le corps noir n'est pas un festin pour apaiser votre gloutonnerie cannibale. Le corps noir n'est pas une esplanade pour promener vos chiens blancs. Le corps noir n'est pas votre code noir. So this was the first poem I wrote on Le Thin Eye Creole. We were invited by, again, I forgot the name, Rebecca Vedavati, to talk about our project. And that was, I think, the day before George Floyd was killed. And immediately, because we were going to speak about our project on this platform, and it occurred to me that we cannot just go and sit on a thin eye and close ourselves without knowing what's happening around us. And so the Thin Eye, as you all already know, that platform, I sat on the Thin Eye and I wanted to talk about what's happening, the George Floyd's murder in terms of poetry. Poetry, I think when I started to write in my young age, poetry was the first expression. I mean, I was like 13, 14 years old. But for some reasons, the poetry just disappear from my from my imagination or even from my inspiration for many years, almost like for 40 years. And then suddenly sitting on the Tinai Creole with you, it came back to me. I don't know what triggered that, and it just came back to me. So Le Tinai Creole has given me back that the poet was died inside me. So he just got reborn on the Tinai Creole through this poem. So you know exactly what the poem is about. We can talk about it. It's about the black body.
Why
And
don't I, sorry, Ari, maybe I
please,
should just read out the
please, of course,
translation.
of course.
I see some more people have joined us and they may not all follow or get the French, but of course, since it's poetry and you are writing in French, we want people to hear the French as well. And we have heard you read out your poem. Let me give people the translation, which then, just as you extremely spontaneously started writing poetry again on the Tinai Creole, I, before I knew it, was translating your French poetry into English equally spontaneously. So this is my translation of the poem that you titled Necropoetic, right? That's the official title of the poem. The black body is no altar at which you genuflect. The black body is no cemetery where you bury your hatred, your xenophobia. The black body is no banquet where you glut your cannibal desire. The black body is no plaza where you promenade your white dogs. The black body is not your black code. So that was my translation of your very powerful poem. And I'd like you to tell us a little bit more, as you were doing before I interrupted, to give the translation to the audience. What precisely? I know it was a very tense moment globally, politically. Yeah. George Floyd had got killed, and he had been killed at the height of the beginning of the pandemic. Nobody knew where we were going. We felt imprisoned. We felt helpless. We felt totally disempowered. And then this event was unfolding in front of our eyes. And maybe it gave you a feeling, a real surge, to use your words, to somehow.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You see, for example, have I written these words and just put on Facebook? Of course, like, maybe 20, 30 people would put a like and love or whatever, put some comments, and that's it. But I would not even thought about this, for me, it was something very spontaneous to sit on the Tinai Creole that we both created and recite this poem. And I'd not even thought, even 2 minutes before doing this, that I'm going to do this. Of course, as I always say, mon gribouillage nocturne. I always write during my sleep.
Nocturnal scribbles, your nighttime scribbles, exactly. Right?
So no, mostly I write poems during my sleep. So this was written exactly the night before, and I didn't know what to do with this. The next morning I could have simply posted on Facebook, just to get some likes and this and that. That's it. But for some reason I kept it, and I didn't know what to do with this. And when we were going on live on the Tinai Creole to present the project, I said, no, let me read it now, because this is the right moment. Because not only because the Tinai Creole that we created, of course, it's a vision, the creolization in India and all over the world, but it's also, as I always said, Le Tinai is a space where you express yourself. Mm-hmm. And it would be really stupid to create that space and me not expressing myself.
Not only is it a space for expressing yourself, it's also a space of resistance, as we know. I think Sonia got it beautifully when she described the stakes that constitute the project. The project is of course a project for it's a project where we enjoy ourselves. We create a community. We make people revel in the histories and the stories and the little nuggets about culture and society that we dig out. But it's not just for that moment, it's to build up a network of resistance to hegemonies, resistance to boxes that we are imprisoned in. And I think that when you, a poet, a person, an individual who's identified by your name, by your use of language, by your location, you're identified as a Franco-Tamil person, already a very complex identity for sure, but there doesn't seem to be anything in there that necessarily connects you to what you are calling the Black body. On the face of it, if you're operating, our job is to dig out the complex histories of India, that itself seems to be a job that's already quite a lot. So what is going on when you are provoked on the Tinai Creole by the atmosphere or the possibility of expressing yourself for resistance? How is this coming out of your pen, if you like, or your mind? A poem about the Black body. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that leap that you make when you want to write a poem about the Black body? Is it simply something that anybody could do, or is there something in your particular, trajectory, a particular personal history that makes you feel this is indeed a connection you want to now, explore for all its potential?
No, but as you already know, that of course that we talk about the Franco-Tamil identity, but in the Franco-Tamil identity, there's also Malagasy. From Madagascar. Yes. And from Madagascar, there is also my grandfather, who is from the Bantu ethnic group, who is the Black person, is an African. So that Africanity inside me, which has not, obviously, I don't look very African, I mean, physically, but that Africanity is inside me. And it's not only that, it's not because I'm Franco-Tamil African. I could have even raised this voice through solidarity, with solidarity to any struggle, Palestine, Latin America, any part of the world, because that's how that's my political conscience, you see.
Yes.
And that is my political sympathy for people who are struggling. Any struggle in the world affects me. And mostly when it comes to that Black struggle, of course, there's a personal touch, because being an Afro descendant myself. Having said that, as the piece I wrote for Suraj Yangde, Negro Radicalite in the Indian Express, it's also my personal story, my personal trajectory from being a colonial subject from Pondicherry, moving to France, and also get exposed to other colonial subjects as like Vietnamese, Algerians, Senegalese. So there is kind of solidarity among ex-colonial subjects. Yeah. You see? So that also creates or makes you understand that you're not alone.
So in other words, the poetry that you started writing became a kind of crossroads of different motivations. I mean, on the one hand, you have your, as all, I hope, political human beings that we are sensitive, as you said, to struggles for identity and representation and justice conducted anywhere in the world. But I don't think we can deny that while that is one frame for the poetry, there is this personal biographical touch. I think it would be equally unjust to deny that biography as it would be to only emphasize that. You see what I mean? It is one of many ingredients, one of many frames, but it is there. And that basically, just to sum up what you said, or maybe people didn't get the whole picture, your mother is from Madagascar, was from Madagascar. Your father is Franco-Tamil from Pondicherry. They met under certain interesting circumstances. We can talk about that too, but not unusual. In a sense, their story is of a pattern of what subjects of the French Empire who were from Pondicherry, where they were going, what kind of worlds they were moving through, what kind of people they met, what kind of intimacies they had. Out of one such relationship, you were produced. So of course, you have that African heritage inside you from your mother's side. Of course, Madagascar is also a very interesting place, also another crossroads. So crossroads within crossroads, you know. And then you have the political, again, training or a spark from being in a very fertile space of Paris and working in the environments of Paris at a certain time, at a certain point in time where there's a lot of radicalization, a lot of discussion of different political subjectivities. And all this comes together, almost catalyzed by the pandemic and the George Floyd conjunction, and the fact that we have created a Thin Air Creole for you to feel free, that this is your space to express yourself. I think on that note, perhaps it would
also, Ananya, remember, I used to live in front of Bharatiar's house, you see, and that is my childhood, and no one is more political than Bharatiar. So, I grew up with Bharatiar's poems. And 2 days back, it was Bharatidasan's birthday. Bharatidasan was my father's teacher in Pondicherry. So again, Bharatidasan used to live 2 streets away from where I used to live. So all this makes, my poetical awareness.
Well, let's go to Negro Dalitalité, the poem that gives its name to the cycle of poems that overall you created during this period, but it is also the name of one of the poems in the cycle. And I think that this poem will really bring out some of these, again, these deeper intersections between the bigger picture, in a way, the transoceanic history of the French Empire, in which your family, through your father and your mother, are embedded, but also the very local specificity of the Tamil world, in which you are also rooted. So do you want to read this poem out, and then I'll follow it with a translation?
Are we talking about Negro Dalitalité?
Yeah, talking about Negro Dalitalité, please.
D'accord. En moi vivent le nègre et le Dalit. L'insulte et la fierté sont mêlés et s'entremêlent dans mon sang. Nègre, hurlé dans le vent, ce mot m'insulte. Je suis nègre, crié au vent, il me rend fier. Dalit, souillé, je me replie sur moi-même. Je suis Dalit, je swing dans ma souillure. Oxymore, pléonasme, contraire et contradiction. Et oui, je suis l'affirmation de vos doutes, puisque je doute vos affirmations. Le paria nègre sème le verbe, à vous de récolter les mots qui sèment.
Let me translate this. Negro Dalitalité, Negro Dalitalité. In me live the Negro and the Dalit. Insult and pride mingle and intermingle in my blood. Negro, howl to the wind, the word insults me. I am Negro, shouted at the wind, it makes me proud. Dalit, soiled, I curl into myself. I am Dalit, the stain becomes my swing. Oxymoron, pleonasm, contrary and contradiction. Oh yes, I am the affirmation of your doubts, because I doubt on your affirmations. The paria negro seeds the word. Up to you to collect the terms that love each other. This poem, obviously, I think, brings to the forefront all these different identity battles that condense in your being, in your own identity. If you have started to identify, or you feel able to identify with the Black body so strongly, as the first poem revealed, it seems that there is some deep connection with that other part of your identity, which traces itself through the word paria, very tainted, as tainted word as the N word, actually. And it traces it back through that word to a bigger resurgent Dalit identity in India today. And so you coined the idea of paria negro, the paria and the negro together. You coined the idea, the term negro dalitalité, the Black person and the Dalit person. Tell us a little bit more about these condensations.
Yeah, again, this is like a self-consciousness of being a Dalit, you see. And of course, as you know, in our Indian society, you don't go and claim out and proudly that I'm a Dalit, you see. That is something that you try not to say it loud, but I decided to say it loud. As I rightly said, Dalit, je suis dans je swing dans ma souillure, mais Dalit crie au vent, il me rend fier. So, that exactly what Aimé Césaire did, taking the word negro and make it in a negritude and appropriate yourself what has been an insult, a derogatory word, and how you transform that in a poetic and also beautiful way to say that it is not as derogatory, or even might seem, it might be an insult for you, not anymore for me, because I am taking back that word and transform it in a poetical sentence and make it more beautiful. So, and as I said, the Black struggle affects me as much the Dalit struggle. So the Black struggle and Dalit struggle goes together. They go together. You can't dissociate.
Yeah. What I find really powerful in the act of writing a poem about this confluence of struggles in you is that, we can write a lot of essays, we can write a whole historical novel about it, perhaps. But, as a literary critic, I feel that the poem has a power, a lyric power that comes from the very fact that it can condense several things at the same time. A narrative that takes the form of a novel or even a short story is a little more poetic in that way because it's shorter. So, you can be a little more crazy with its temporality. But I do feel that while all of us get an undeniable joy from reading a novel, that joy really comes from sinking into the flow of the narrative, following the story, a thread through time. And that often means that a simultaneity can be lost. Because if you're moving in time, in sequence, you can't perhaps do many things together. So you have to first explain how you're a Dalit, then you have to explain your Black, lineage. It becomes a little kind of, then by the time the power and the thrust of the moment is gone, you're going with the flow. Whereas I think with the poem, everything can be brought together so tightly. And even the very word that you love to coin terms to do, that is the poetic part of you. You adore playing with words and creating newer and newer neologisms to express these unusual, but yet for you extremely normal conjunction, So negro dalitarite, para negro. You coined another word, allegro parai, and you have a poem on that too. I think this poem will really express to the audience what you're saying about reclaiming with pride, the idea of being a pariah. Do you want to read that out, please?
Yeah, and this again, it's very interesting because I start with the sound of the pare molam, dan danaku, danakadaku, right? And this I got inspired by Bharatiya's poem, who is a Brahmin, and I'm a Dalit, and where Bharatiya finished his poem with a rhythm. There's one that is very, very Carnatic, very like traditional music. So I'm taking it back and showing my la fierté d'être un paria. So
your pride.
Danakadaku. Qui joue mon molam? Danaku. Danakadaku. Qui annonce à ma place? Poussez-vous, éloignez-vous, écartez-vous. Il arrive là, le paria, l'intouchable, leur caste. Son ombre est une souillure et son âme abjecte. Même l'air se pollue sur son passage. Mon cœur meurtri se déchire comme une peau trop tendue. Jadis, je chantais les héros sur les champs de bataille. Je réveillais les dieux dans leur sommeil. Je célébrais l'amour dans les mariages. Je louais le nouveau-né. Hélas, me voilà condamné à accompagner la mort et à faire danser les cadavres. Pareil, maudit, gueux, exclu. Ces mots sont devenus les cendres de cette société qui a brûlé mon âme. Par rien je suis né, mais par rien je ne mourrai. Mon molam s'insurge dans l'archipel des fragments et fait résonner l'allegro pareil sur le tenai créole. Dan danake. Danake. Voilà.
My turn now. Dandanaku. Danakadaku. Who is beating my molam? Dandanaku. Danakudaku. Who announces my arrival? Move away, step away, go away. He's here, the pariah, the untouchable, the outcast. His shadow is a stain, his soul abject. The very air is polluted by his passage. My bruised heart is bursting like too tight skin. Once, I used to sing about heroes on the battlefield. I used to wake the gods up from their sleep. I used to celebrate love at weddings. I used to praise the newly born. Now, alas, they've condemned me to escort death, to make corpses dance. Pariah, accursed, beggar, excluded. These terms are society's ashes that have charred my soul. Pariah, I was born, but pariah, I won't die. My molam rises up through the archipelago of fragments and makes allegro parai reverberate on the Tinai Creole. Dandanaku. Danakadoku. That was your poem.
Yep. So
I want us to think a little bit about the word allegro parai in this poem. Would you like to talk about it? Because people may be hearing this for the first time, and it's important to unpack it a bit, I think.
then again, it's again your influence, our work together, and everybody knows what a parai molam is. Parai, as Sonia knows, in Tamil and in Malayalam means speak. Parayam. But that parayam has become a what do you call instrument, a musical instrument, and then it becomes a caste, and it becomes derogatory, and it becomes an insult. So how again we reappropriate all these words in terms of joy, which you taught me, because you have your word, you coined that word allegro politics, with the joy of being. So while working with you, the Tinai Creole, and writing this poem, of course, I took allegro from you and I take my parai, and that's how we create this space, and that's how we work together. So
Just
that is
need
what,
to answer my mother. এই আমি একটুখানি ফোনে আছি, সরি আমি একটু একটা ইভেন্টে আছি, আমি তোমাকে পরে করছি ফোন। ওকে, I've decided to never not answer my mother's call wherever I am speaking.
We are sitting on the Tinai, no, so you can do whatever you.
Yeah, so I just I'm at an event. She knows what that means. So yes, allegro parai, you were talking about how you were influenced, or you thought meaningful my own work on the idea of joy as resistance, and my coinage of the term allegro politics, and it resonated with you literally, and you decided to create another of your very interesting condensed neologisms, allegro parai, the parai molam that beats out in joyous resistance, I imagine.
Exactly. Yeah, because as the poem says, because the parai molam normally now it is used only for funeral procession, but historically it was used for everything. I mean, yeah. Mainly to announce, and secondly also to beat the drums while the king is coming back from the battle victoriously. So all this, that historical process has been erased. Now we're only playing for the funeral by low caste people. Okay, thank God now, because that Dalit cinema is bringing back into kind of popular culture. So any songs now in Tamil as one parai beat. So yeah, and maybe the next poem I should write about Dapangutu. So that's again.
That's another beat, another rhythm, and another embodied movement.
That goes back to again allegro parai. So Dapangutu will be my next poem.
Well, in the chat, there is a resounding yes. So I think people want your Dapankutu poem. And
That's
then
my that's my brother Arjun. Thank you,
yes.
Arjun,
Oh,
for
is it
being there.
Arjun? Oh, I didn't know who AR
Yeah,
was.
Arjun.
Ah, well, Arjun,
Merci
I've
d'être
been
là.
talking about you without knowing you were in the audience. Well, it's great that you're here. Thank you for joining us. And we hope we're going to have this event with you that we were talking about earlier. But to go back then to Allegro Parai and Allegro Politics, I mean, actually, I'm quite grateful that you introduced this term and my work, because in a way, it fills the blank that Sonia also left. And when she was introducing me, she was saying that I'm writing a new book. And that is indeed about this idea of Allegro politics that I've coined. Now, this is another very interesting intersection that shows, again, the ease with which you and I started working together or thinking together, because before I met you, I too was working on what the expressive histories of the African diaspora and the African people's, struggles through slavery, enslavement, colonialism, and so on. The expressive histories that have come out of that struggle and trauma, I was really working on how that history can again be seen almost as a tool for humanity in general. For people who are not necessarily at all connected with anything genetically to do with Africa, like myself, we nevertheless, when we hear that music, when we hear the blues, when we hear jazz, when we want to move to anything that's coming out of that Africanity, the trauma of Africanity, we also understand how the body can be a tool for resistance through enjoying that embodied culture. And it's a way of saying something, not saying something, even doing something together. Rhythm brings people together. And that, in a way, has its own history and its own future, And so I was already kind of theorizing this and working with this, and I used the word Allegro politics, the politics of joy, to kind of like, to express myself. And you liked this, and you created a word in your own turn called Allegro Parai, the precise, expressive joy of the Parai drums. And you very interestingly mentioned it's Bharatiyar, who used the very Carnatic rhythms in his music, in his poetry, and you were inspired by that to use the rhythm of the Parai molam in your poetry already in
that is the response from the Dalit to the Brahmin.
Exactly. And this tendency or this desire of an elite person to try and bring rhythm of drums into their writing is already seen in Cuban poetry. For example, one of my favorite poets from Cuba, Nicolas Guillen, who is also an elite Cuban, he's coming from an elite part of Cuban society, but like so many elites, they want to know the rhythm and the heartbeat of the non-elites. And he understands the way drums and dancing and rhythm are forming part of the Afro-Cuban, heritage. And he's trying to bring those rhythms into his poetry. He does exactly the same thing. The question is, of course, without hearing the rhythm as you make us hear it when you recite, that resistance is not complete. We need the sound, we need the body. We just cannot sit on the level of the words inscribed on the page. We have to release that energy. I think what I want us to do now is understand through you now and through the fourth poem we want to talk about, how that energy of history, once you activate memory, how does history come alive through that energy of activation? We know you're a historical novelist, and then you started writing poems. And these poems came out of a very personal space, as poetry does. But then I think you also, already the Allegro Parai, where you're talking about the histories that are lost of the molam, and how you are activating and reviving those histories in your poem. I think this becomes something that you begin to do on quite a grand scale in this poem we want to now talk about.
Yeah, La Tragédie Cotonale, again, it's not an inspiration, but I like the idea of Edouard Glissant, La mémoire du futur.
The memory of the future.
The memory of the future. How we take facts and things which has happened in the past to create the future. So I called it La Tragédie Cotonale, and maybe when we talk, I can explain a little bit more, and you know exactly. Gossypium arbarium, Gossypium herbaceum, Gossypium barbadense, Gossypium hirsutum. Au commencement, je n'étais que fibre. On me cueillit et on me transforma en fil pour faire de moi un tissu. Tissu, j'aurais pu le rester pour couvrir la nudité de l'humanité. Toile, j'aurais pu le demeurer pour étoffer le rêve des hommes libres. Hélas, on vola mon destin pour faire de moi le linceul des destins brisés. J'étais bleu à Pondichéry, je devins rouge de sang sur les rives de Sénégambie. Guinée, murmura l'eau. Peut-on essuyer les larmes d'un fleuve avec un oripeau? Je devins bâillon pour faire taire les bruits des chaînes. On se servit de moi pour essorer la sueur, essuyer le sang, frotter les corps, épouster l'infamie, dépoussiérer la bonne conscience et nettoyer la honte. Dans les cales, j'ai nettoyé les plaies. Je pensais la douleur de l'étranger. J'étouffais les plaintes d'un continent saccagé. Témoin de barbarie, de cruauté et de bestialité, je ponds comme un vulgaire drapeau sur le marche entaché par la mort. Madras, marmonna l'océan. Caraïbes, lorsque de tes rivages souffle le vent pour faire siffler les voiles et le mât, je ploie sous la honte. Je sèche les larmes. Je couvre les corps meurtris par le coup de fouet. J'enveloppe la chair boursouflée qui se rappelle la douce brise de la savane. Je fagote la mort pour qu'elle paraisse belle et innocente. Je pars l'humanité par la mission civilisatrice et parade la conscience habillée de pharisaïsme. Mais qui a attaché le morceau de sucre au bout de mon mouchoir? Legba accueille Karpusami. Bas-moi la main, frère. Zindien, Girmitia, Allegremitia. Maître, esclave, engagé, doré. Colon, colonie, colonisateur. J'essuie les mots blancs de mon tableau noir. Peut-on effacer la mémoire? Le tapetin, le djembé, le gokwa résonnent sur l'archipel fragmenté. L'afrovidien crie « Créole !» Qui créole? Lui rétorque l'archipel des fragments.
That's a long poem and a very complex and beautiful poem. I think it's one of the most difficult things that I've ever done, having to translate it, but somehow we managed. So I'll not let the people who don't understand French wait any longer. They must have got some words. Let me read out the translation and then we can have a little conversation about the poem. So the poem is called Tragédie Cotonale, which I translated the title as Cottonian Tragedy. I don't think any adjective of cotton exists, but we had to create one. Cottonian Tragedy. Gossypium arbarium, Gossypium herbaceum, Gossypium barbadense, Gossypium hirsutum. In the beginning, I was but fiber. I was plucked and I was transformed into a thread to make me into a cloth. Cloth I could have remained to cover the nudity of humanity. Canvas I could have stayed to unfurl the dream of free men. Alas, my fate was stolen, to turn me into the shroud of broken fates. Blue was I in Pondicherry, blood red I became on Senegambia's shores. Guinea, whispered the water. Can you wipe a river's tears with these tawdry tatters? I became a gag to silence the noises of chains. They used me to wipe blood, wring out sweat, scrub bodies, dust off infamy, to buff up clear conscience and to clean up shame. In the hold, I cleaned wounds. I bandaged the foreigner's pain. I muffled the moans of a ransacked continent, witness to barbarism, to cruelty and bestiality. I hang like some vulgar flag on the death-stained mast. Madras, whispered the ocean. Caribbean, when your shores blow the wind that whistles through the sail and the mast, I bend with shame. I dry tears. I cover bodies bruised by whiplashes. I swaddle swollen flesh that remembers the savannah's soft breeze. I wrap up death to give it beauty and innocence. I clothe savagery with a civilizing mission and parade the conscience dressed in the Pharisee's garb. But who attached this piece of sugar to the end of my kerchief? Legba welcomes Karupusami. Bas-moi la main, fée. Negro, negrière, negritude. Zandien, girmitia, allegromitia. Master, slaves, the indentured, durais. Colonies, colonized, colonizers. I wipe off the white words on my blackboard. Can we erase memory? The tapatai, the djembe, the gwoka resonate on the fragmented archipelago. The Afrovidian cries, Creole, qui Creole, retorts the archipelago of fragments.
Merci.
So, well, merci to you for conceiving and giving words to such a conception. Because it's a very complex poem. My students, my MA students have enjoyed it. We studied it alongside works such as Amitav Ghosh's Circle of Reason, which is also about cotton, Vasanji's Gunny Sack, which is also about textiles, Abdul Razak Gurna's Paradise, which is also about how textiles moves through what we can call the Afro-Asian Sea. The Indian Ocean world, but then, as you show in the poem, connects the movement of these textiles of cotton, connects the histories of the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean, but in sordid and degraded ways for humanity. And somehow you write a beautiful poem that makes something that restores to dignity, you know, those histories in a way. Tell us a little bit about how you came to write a poem in which cotton is given a voice.
But you know, already in my novel, The Thin, I already talk about the cotton, the place of cotton, and how this piece of cloth, which has been produced, manufactured in Pondicherry, called the Guinea Blue. So the Guinea Blue was taken to West Africa to buy slaves to send them to Caribbean. So this is a plot in my novel. And when we decided to have this event called Rhythm of Blues, no, is that Rhythm of Blues? What is it called?
Weaving the Rhythm of Blues.
Yeah, Weaving the Rhythm of Blues, exactly. And again, spontaneously, it came to my mind to tell the story of this fiber, this cloth, how it was manufactured in Pondicherry, and how exactly, you know, that how much I'm obsessed to pin Pondicherry in the global level, and to tell such a small mot de terre, as our friend Alain Babankou used to call, cette petite mot de terre, this small mot de terre from Pondicherry, the kind of place it had in the global history. So, you know, that is very important to tell to people. That is not just a small white town, black town, 4 boulevards. No, it carries a weight of history in it. So the cotton taken from Pondicherry to Senegal, from Senegambie to Caribbean, and also to tell the stories of slavery and indentured labors. And so again, that kind of solidarity, because indentured labor, even in India, we don't know about those people who left our shores, who are living all over the world in different islands. This part of history is not taught in any schools in India. So that is very important, how to bring back the memories of those people who left the shores. And how it also, again, that connection of the Indian with Afro-descendant.
Yeah.
So that, again, brings back to our creolization, the work we are doing together.
You know, this is a very important poem, Ari, because it, I think each of the 4 poems that we have talked about and you've read out and I translated, we chose these poems carefully. You had created quite a bunch of poems. You had written quite a group of poems around this time. Sorry?
It's on Facebook.
But these four we took out because we had an opportunity to publish them. And for people who might want to read these poems, they are available online, open access at the Italian post-colonial review called Il Tolomeo, Tolomeo, which is basically the Italian word for Ptolemy. I don't know why they call the journal Il Tolomeo, we can ask. But Il Tolomeo is a very interesting platform. People should know about it because people who listen to us here are interested in poetry. It actually publishes original poetry and prose too, in translation and the original. So we had the opportunity to publish these 4 poems by Ari in their French original, add my English translation, and also our co-translator, Luca Raimondi, who was the bridge to Il Tolomeo because he's Italian, he's my postdoc. He created some Italian translations. So, it's a trilingual translation, and people do check out Il Tolomeo. The most interesting, happy part of it all is it's open access. So anybody can just click on the link, download these poems, read them, and, enjoy them in your own time. But we chose these 4 poems. They kind of complemented each other in mood, in kind of like even shape and size. Some of the poems are quite short, like the poem we started with, Necro Poetic, and Cottonian Tragedy is quite long and complex. But as we know, in poetry, there's room for everything. And this poem also mingles what I see is the lyric voice, or creates or interpolates into the lyric voice a historical, line. And this makes the poem really quite rich, very complex to unfold, but complex poetry is also very simple, When I used to teach, I've always taught a class to my first year undergraduates called Reading Poetry. And when I used to do the opening lecture for that, I called the opening lecture on how not to understand poetry, because I believe to not understand poetry is the way to actually understand it. So the more complexity that you receive in a poem, the more beautiful the challenge is for the reader. Sometimes you can just enjoy the words and get the sense through how the words pass through our bodies, So there are lots of words in this poem that are from different languages, Haitian Creole, different kinds of Creole, Tamil, Bhojpuri. There are so many words that you bring into the ambit of this poem, because you are creating through your poem a space for a global history. The history of the world of migrant labor and how it connects with enslavement is funneled through this poem. And this poem becomes a space for all those discarded remnants, which nevertheless made modernity, And what I also like very much about this poem is the place it gives to the gods, the subaltern gods. You have the last paragraph, the last stanza, Legba welcomes Karupusami. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what that sentence,
Yeah, but exactly, it again to break that hegemony of Vedic gods, you see, and how the subaltern gods, the rural gods, the Grama Devata, as we call it in Tamil, they play an important role in our society. But for some reasons, we like to, not to see them. And it's also part of my my literary work, how to bring back this Grama Devata. All my Karupusami is my favorite, Madhuraviran and Ayanar. They are my favorite gods. How I bring them in the global history and make them meet Legba in one way, made them Freya in the Nordic space. How these subaltern gods, they resist in their own way again some kind of hegemonic gods.
Yeah. I got a comment. There's a comment from Sonia, and she reminds us that these gods, Gramadevatas, are very important in southern Kerala, especially the borderlands of Kerala and Tamil Nadu. And borderlands of any kinds, these margins are where these figures thrive, and are given and gather potency. And it's exactly the same for the Afro-diasporic gods, Legba, Elegba, Elegua, goes by many names. He is also Gramadevta, of that world, because this figure comes with the Africans from West Africa, from the West African coast. It's part of the voodoo cosmogony, which is still practiced as a religion in places like Benin and Nigeria. And then, in a very fragmented way, these gods and the cosmogonies were very complex, got reassembled in different parts of the African diaspora in the Americas and the Caribbean. And the same names, but with some slight phonetic variations, just like Karupusami has many variations, right? Or Madurai Veeran has many variations, because people hear, they don't write the names of these subaltern beings. No. They hear them. And so they can, change in the pronunciation and dialect and accent. But anyway, Legba is the Haitian god, deity of opening the pathways, and also in Cuba he is called Elegua. He's also very mischievous. He's a trickster god. I learned about all these gods because I started dancing Afro-Cuban dance, and I learned these gods play such an important role in the way even the dance figures itself, but they play a very important role in Haitian sacrality. So they are gods of resistance as well. When the whole Haitian revolution started, the voodoo gods gave again that was the fuel to the fire, that allowed the revolution to even erupt. So I think it's really significant that you bring these two gods together in a handshake, And the next line, which is a Haitian Creole line from a book that you've read in your childhood, actually says, "Give me your hand," isn't it?
The Gouverneur de la Rosée from Jacques Romain, exactly.
And that's the line that stuck in your mind because you were reading this book as a school boy in Pondicherry.
I was 12 years old.
Yeah. And this line resonates down the decades and then reappears in this beautiful.
I already entered the space of creolization at a very young age. I mean, I know people who know Pondicherry, it's a Creole space itself. That's
Absolutely.
What we are trying to.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you're the embodiment of it. You are giving voice to it. You're making your poetry, your writing, and indeed Atenai Creole in the work we both do together becomes a space of connecting. And this act of connection and what happens when you connect, Do you connect to create some kind of a new wholeness? We don't believe that. We have coined this phrase, the archipelago of fragments, which our friends listening to us have obviously heard resonate through a couple of the poems. And maybe it's a good way to end by telling people what that means. Like, for example, the way Cottonian tragedy ends, you say that all these different drums from different traditions, the tapatai, which is a Tamil drum, the djembe, which is an African drum, and the guoka, which is a Caribbean drum, all these drums resonate on the fragmented archipelago. That's one thing. And then you say the Afrovidian, that's you, the African and the Dravidian, the Afrovidian cries, almost longing, Creole. And there is a retort from the archipelago of fragments. Qui Creole? What Creole? And that's where the poem ends.
Who is Creole?
Yeah. So actually, you're right. Qui Creole is who is Creole, but I'm thinking of it in Bengali. Because Bengali is the same Qui Creole, So I just kind of translated it in my Bengali way.
No, because in Martinique or in Guadeloupe, they say Kimun. Kimunsa.
What kind of person is this? Yeah. So do you want to tell people a little bit about the archipelago of fragments, and then we can start bringing this to a close?
Yeah, archipelago of fragments. This is again the work we do together, and the archipelagic concept is your concept. How these different islands, they're not isolated, but they're interconnected in such a way. And I like that we like that poetical aspect of fragmentation. Archipelago of fragments makes it even more beautiful. So we went through that, and we're still working on this what is archipelago of fragments, and we both like that words, because sometimes we just like words, the way it sounds. It doesn't have a proper meaning. Sometimes it should be meaningless, but just to just to listen to them. It's like Bharatidasan said, Tamil, the word Tamil, it's like pouring honey in my ear. You see, say again, I'm losing my Tamil. Tamil என்னும் போதினிலே இன்பத்தேன் வந்து பாய்து காதினிலே. So that is what Bharatidasan says. So words should be just words for the beauty of words.
That's a really amazing way, I think, to end our conversation, because the poet wants the words to be like honey in the ear, which already shows the transposition of taste into sound. Honey you can taste, but the ear hears. And the honey in the ear, I mean, if you ask a doctor, pouring honey into ear would be terrible, would be a catastrophe. But honey in the ear makes poetic sense.
I would finish with this, because you remember in the old times, Sanskrits, if a pariah, a Dalit person hears Sanskrit, they said they are to what you call put iron, melted iron in the ear, right? Because they're not supposed to hear that. And I like that fact that Bharatidasan takes it and put so that
molten lead in the ear is what Sonia reminds us. This is thank you again. This makes again many things come together in this image, which
so again we're talking about resistance
again. How the poet can transform molten lead, the oppression of centuries, the whole body. I mean, what does this molten lead signify? That the portal through which the human accesses, one of the portals through which the human accesses the world, somebody else is going to close that portal, by pouring molten lead, which will solidify. And, this power that someone has over the body of another is what is being resisted by through the centuries, by different kinds of expressions on an individual and collective level. And your resistance is to remind us that honey, let me pour that honey into the ear, which will do something magical. It will do what honey does, please you, make, give you sensuous pleasure. But in that sensuous pleasure, there's an awakening, a reawakening of the social consciousness, the radical consciousness. I know that as a poet, you don't want words to mean things, because that's what I said. Poetry is about not understanding. But I think poetry is also a prism through which that which you don't understand passes. And then we at the other side, the readers, see the rainbow, light, plain, colorless light becomes a rainbow through the prism. So poetry is that prism. And the delight that we get also is an awakening, I think, must be. I mean, I'm reminded of the words of Czesław Milosz. He said, what is poetry that does not save nations or people? It is but a collusion with official lies. So I think our nation is that of creolization, the Thinai Creole is an anti-nation nation. We don't believe in the borders of a nation. We believe in the nation of feeling and connection and resistance. So that is also the archipelago of fragments. A fragment can never be a cartographically bounded nation, but it can form the basis of another collective. So maybe on that note, Ari, thank you for giving me the opportunity to translate your poems. And Sonia, we are all yours to close the session or open it to questions, whatever you feel.
Well, I guess we could have a couple of questions before we close. If anybody would like to ask Ari and Ananya anything. I've been reading your stories, Ari, with a lot of interest, particularly the one where the journey takes place through all those lands, a man and a dog. I think the dog is, there is Karupasamy in those series of stories. Right, and they meet a woman, and they sit by the side of the road, and they're having a meal. It's from a while ago, actually, but all of that has remained in my mind for a while. But they're eating out of a pot. I remember all of these things. So, I just wanted to ask you, as somebody who straddles a number of different countries and cultures and has carried all these troubled histories on your back and in your psyche, I wanted to ask you what your idea of nation is.
Wow, that's that's an interesting question. Yeah, what's a nation? And mainly, if you go back to down the history, of course, France must have been the first nation in the world, because after the revolution, which has become so. I carry that heritage back in me. A nation. What is a nation? Is for me. I prefer countries than nation. You see, and nation is a political is a political agenda, but a country is where people live with harmony or without harmony, but it's more with living with feelings and with emotions. But a nation becomes something too political for me, so I don't believe in any kind of nation. And geographical areas are more interesting for me than people who believe in one nation, in one idea, what is a nation should be. And that's exactly the kind of very disturbing times that we are living now in our country. I don't even call nation. So no, I'm against the notion of nation. Totally.
Ananya, how would you respond to that?
Well, we are, it's interesting, isn't it, that in modernity, we come default option, with some kind of national identity. People who are stateless or nationless, pragmatically, they have even more of a problem than some of us with certain passports that are problematic, because they have to even start, like they start from ground zero. They don't even have the papers. They have to have some sort of replacement document. So to be stateless is indeed a problem in the modern world, in our contemporary world. And to be stateless is also to be kind of nation stateless. So, the yoking of the nation and the state, we know enough of, through political science and historians of how this conjunction has come to be, how the nation and the state have combined. The point is that it's a very uneasy juxtaposition. It's also a construct that's imposed on us, and 99% of humanity takes it for granted, and doesn't question it. When does the idea become more than just a base level of existence? When emotions are whipped up around it, and we are living through such a time again right now. We know exactly what I'm talking about. And this kind of crude whipping up of feelings around the idea of the nation is precisely what obviously makes it a very difficult concept to then cling to. We all need to belong. We all need to, I think, project our feelings, of love, belonging, attention, fidelity. We want to project these feelings onto something bigger than just ourselves. The problem, I think, is that the idea of the nation, which is a very easy recipient for these feelings, not least because of the history of colonialism and the struggle for identity, which predicated the post-colonial nation as a legitimate entity, unfortunately has kind of, these phases we are going through means that legitimate space for bigger feelings to attach to have become very easily transformed into the way of othering, of creating not just nation, but who belongs within it, but asserting that others do not. So, these kinds of issues around the idea of the nation obviously renders it very problematic for us. I believe, therefore, in nation as, as I just said, there are other ways of connecting. We cannot wish away our national belonging. We have to work towards connecting with others despite it, or almost in the process reclaim it, or even creolize it, creolize the nation in different ways, I think is what we can do, because we are not going anywhere without it at the moment. We are it's a construct of modernity, like schools, like hospitals, like juridical codes. It's a product of modernity. We are embedded in it. I don't believe there's a space outside of modernity. That's the way I feel. We have to transform it and make it work for ourselves. So let's creolize the nation, is my feeling.
I agree. Let's creolize the nation. Anybody else would like to ask a question or have any remarks? There is Arjun.
A couple of minutes.
Sure.
Yeah. So Ari, firstly, I mean, brilliant reading and then sort of musicality. It's just some sort of an echo, Sonia. Is it okay? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Is it okay? Okay. Yeah, the poem with the dun, 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 the drum beats, it's still I'm still tapping my fingers to it, and I mean, it's just amazing how you managed to translate this. I mean, the musicality, bring it all, and achieve it in English. But of course, since I understand a bit of French, I was able to enjoy and profit from both versions. So congratulations on. So these poems are not from a collection yet, correct?
They have been published as a cycle of 4. The 4 we read out. So we call it a cycle, which is, I think, a good word for it. And they are, as I said, published in Il Tolomeo, but they haven't formed the basis yet of do you know what I mean? I mean, Ari has not done further with it. Yeah.
Okay. So my question for Ari is, so he grew up in Pondicherry. I mean, said you were creolized at a very early age. When did you start thinking of your experiences into the poetic form, into verse? When did that begin?
Yeah, as I said, Arjun, thanks for being here. Thanks. As I said, I started writing poetry in a very early age because of the influence, because I used to live in front of Bharatiar's house, but that doesn't make you writing poetry, of course. It's not because you live in front of, Bharatiar Kardiyam Kavida person solvanga, because the donkey of Bharatiar doesn't write poetry. But no, I think I got what do you call the poetic sensitivity, you see, at a very early age. And I used to, like any, young teenager, you used to write some poems here and there. But already there was some kind of social poem I was looking, because again, that is the Bharatiar influence, right? He wanted to change the society. But then I didn't feel fully armed in expressing myself through poetry. You see, I need to mature myself in order to make some kind of statement as identity, through identity, and the political statement I want to make. I was not fully armed, so I need some time. I need to mature myself. I need to grow, and I think I'm 57 now. I think I'm not quite sure. I think quite armed. That's one of the reasons that Tragédie Cotonale is doing, is taking all this experience in life and all this knowledge I got through ages in order to write this complex poem. And I don't think I would have been able to do that when I was younger. And yeah, so I was more into writing fiction because my imagination goes in that way. But when you want to write poetry, there is some structure, you might know. So that structure, I'm trying slowly getting there. But sometimes it bothers me because I hate structures.
Yeah, I think Tragédie Cotonale needs to be translated into even Tamil and yeah, even more. I mean, that's just historically so important. I think si crée la patrimoine. That's very important heritage. That's very important And since we have time, Sonia, forgive me, but I'm going to suppose Ari and Ananya both, and I would love for you guys to again read at TQT.
Merci beaucoup, Arjun. Merci infiniment.
Si vous voulez, oui. Ce sera notre plaisir, absolument. I'll send you a formal invite and more poems, absolutely more poems, and a longer session because this was too short. And I'm just amazed the way you're able to, I'm just explaining. Sorry, I can hear my own voice again. So it's
there is some system that is on, I think, with the volume started. That must be it. Yeah, it's better now.
But thank you, Arjun, for appreciating, especially the efforts of the translator, because it was not easy at all.
I can't imagine, how you're able to do it at all. And the sort of complexity he brings in and the diverse sources and the different musical instruments. And I noticed that you also left certain phrases in their original, like obviously the Latin.
The entire thing had to be debated and discussed quite a lot, particularly once we realized that we were going to be publishing them, So it was a very interesting exercise. And today we didn't have time to talk about the nitty-gritty of the translation. But we'd love to do that too.
Yes, absolutely. I think we'll do that too, the translation. And I also want, I think the poem should be read, on the screen.
Yes. We can work on that. In fact, we could even bring Luca Raimondi, because in a way, the translations were very interestingly done in a threesome, because Italian is, of course, as you know, Arjun, very well, quite close to French. English is coming at an angle to these two languages. So we kind of worked in a triangle together, all on Zoom, by the way. This was the height of the pandemic. Nobody was meeting anybody. It was so complex to do this on screen, and yet we managed it. So I think it would be, if you had room for him too to come on, Ari, don't you think it would be quite interesting to have Luca there?
Let's
so,
do that.
That's the future, of course. But
I think we can plan that later, right?
Of course. But Sonia, you opened the doors for us.
Sonia.
So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Sonia, for this brilliant session. And sorry, I joined a little late. I realized it's Ari session. I'm like, oh, I'm going to jump in.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
So this has been a wonderful conversation. I am very grateful. Thank you. Yes. If there are any closing remarks?
I have one last question. Because Creole, see, the thing is, I always, because of my ignorance and everything, the only Creole I heard of is, the Creole in Mauritius, that's the French Creole. So the Creolization you both speak of. So when we say we need to Creolize the world, can you elaborate on that just a little bit? Sorry, Sonia, just a minute more, if possible.
Ananya, you can go.
So firstly, historically, Arjun, you're quite right that maybe some of us hear of some Creoles more than others, for example, Mauritian Creole, but there are many Creoles all around the world. And they were created at a particular historical watershed moment, which is when Europeans started spreading all over the world, bringing different European peoples to new places, but also and other people were also either being brought there, like the Africans as slaves, or the Indians as indentured labor, or coming there of their own volition, like merchants, missionaries, and so on. So the places, especially like the places you speak of in your poetry, were hotspots of what we can see as Creolization, which theoretically I understand as a way to describe what happens when different kinds of peoples are forcibly brought together to occupy a kind of constricted space, which could be an island, perfect example of a constricted space, but also can be these enclaves, island-like spaces, like you know very well, because your poems really talk about what goes on in these island-like spaces, Pondicherry being one of them. And there are many of these spaces, for example, even on in Malacca, the west coast of Africa, and so on. So this is these islands and island-like spaces are like nodes on a map where similar processes are going on in parallel. And these processes are linguistically creating what are called Creole languages, but they're also creating Creole cultures. And because similar people are moving up and down these nodes in the course of colonization and expansionism and mercantile, movement, there are kind of similar ingredients being deposited in each spaces, but the local circumstances being very different. No two Creoles can ever be the same. You see, sometimes there can be some interesting parallels, like Mauritian Creole is actually very similar linguistically to Haitian Creole and very different from Réunion Creole, even though Réunion and Mauritius are very close to each other. So these surprising developments are, being studied by linguists, but they're also very interesting for people interested in culture, So what we do is think about creolization, therefore, as a way to connect dissimilarities, to create again this idea of a web of dissimilar similarities or similar dissimilarities. Do you see what I mean? And therefore, the archipelago of fragments, we have no interest in saying, therefore, when we say the whole world must creolize, we don't want to create a seamless creolized continuum. Rather, these discontinuities and recognition of them helps us come together.
Merci. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Now, we are really pressed for time, but I wanted to say that I have really enjoyed this conversation, and the way that we all have kind of integrated over these very important intersections, and the fire in your poetry, Ari, has been so significant. And though I could not understand them in the French, the translations have been extremely helpful in doing that. So, and I suppose without a certain degree of understanding, without a certain degree of being able to feel what is being narrated, that synergy would not come about. So thank you, Ananya, for being such an effective interlocutor, forming that bridge between Ari's poetry, thought, and, well, non-French people like me. Okay, so and also many regards to the Tinai, and I hope it keeps growing and reaching many other locales and connecting many such people. Okay,
thank you.
So all the very best for the future as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you.
Thank you, the people
and everybody who came and participated in these discussions and who will be catching up later on. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.